Some stories of wealth are about success. This is a story about consequence. It begins in a place of cold marble and colder hearts, a probate courtroom. On one side, Richard Sterling, a man whose net worth was matched only by his arrogance, openly laughed. His hand was intertwined with that of his much younger mistress, Tiffany, a woman draped in diamonds that his dying wife had paid for. They were there for the final formality, the reading of his wife Claire's will, a document Richard assumed was his golden ticket to absolute freedom. But in the hushed silence of the court, a judge was about to read a testament that was not an ending, but a beginning. A perfectly plotted posthumous revenge that would unravel everything. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Francisco Superior Court was thick with the scent of old paper-polished mahogany and the cloying sweetness of Tiffany Monroe's perfume. It was a somber room by design, meant to humble those who entered. But Richard Sterling was not a man who humbled easily. He sat at the plaintiff's table, a portrait of success carved from granite and greed. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, a dark charcoal that cost more than the average car. A Patek Philippe gleamed on his wrist, its quiet ticking counting down the seconds to his ultimate victory. He wasn't sad. The very notion was absurd. Claire, his wife of 25 years, was dead. It was a pity, of course, in the way a retired racehorse being put down was a pity a once valuable asset had reached the end of its utility. For the last 5 years of her life as a quiet, insidious illness had stolen her vitality. Claire had become more of a fixture than a partner, a ghost haunting the halls of their Pacific Heights mansion, a constant sighing reminder of a life he had long since outgrown. His real life was Tiffany. She sat beside him now, a vibrant splash of color in the muted room. Her blonde hair was a perfect cascade of engineered waves, her dress a daring shade of crimson that defied the solemnity of the occasion. She squeezed his hand, her long manicured nails gently scraping his skin. He glanced at her, a smirk playing on his lips. She was his future, young, vivacious, and utterly devoted not to him precisely, but to the world he could give her. He was fine with that arrangement. It was honest in its own transactional way. Across from them sat Alistair Finch Clare's personal attorney. He was a relic from another era, a man of 60 with a spine of steel and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had been Claire's counsel for decades, a friend of her family long before Richard had entered the picture. Richard despised him. Finch represented the old guard, the quiet inherited wealth that Claire came from a world that had always looked down on Richard, the self-made tycoon who'd built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up through sheer brutal force of will. He had married Claire for her name and her seed money, and he had never let either of them forget it. At the head of the room, Judge Arthur Pendleton adjusted his spectacles. He was another of them, an old friend of Claire's father. His face was a mask of judicial impartiality, but Richard could feel the man's disapproval radiating across the room like a cold draft. Let him disapprove. In a few minutes it wouldn't matter. The will would be read, the estate would be his, and he would walk out of this dreary building and never look back. "We are gathered today," Judge Pendleton began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that filled the chamber for the reading of the last will and testament of Claire Lowell Sterling. "Mr. Finch, you may proceed." Alistair Finch stood a leather-bound folio in his hands. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." He looked directly at Richard, his expression unreadable. This will was executed by Mrs. Sterling on the 3rd of March 2025, 3 weeks prior to her passing. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized, and I can attest to the fact that Mrs. Sterling was of sound mind and body, albeit physically frail when she composed it. Richard shifted in his seat, impatient. "Get on with it, Alistair. Some of us have lunch reservations." Tiffany giggled softly, a tinkling sound that was horribly out of place. Judge Pendleton's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Mr. Sterling, you will maintain decorum in this courtroom, or I will have you removed and we will proceed without you." Richard's smirk tightened, but he gave a curt nod. The old fool could have his moment of power. Finch opened the folio. "I, Claire Lowell. Sterling." He began reading, his voice steady. "Being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." He went through the initial bequests, Claire's collection of first edition novels to the San Francisco Public Library, a generous donation to the animal shelter where she had volunteered in her youth, a series of smaller sentimental gifts to distant cousins and old family friends, jewelry, a painting, a porcelain set. Richard barely listened. This was the fluff, the sentimental nonsense Claire always busied herself with. He was waiting for the main event. The houses, the art collection, the stock portfolio, and most importantly, her controlling shares in Sterling Enterprises. She had inherited a 51% stake from her father, a fact that had been a thorn in Richard's side for their entire marriage. Though he ran the company, she had always held the ultimate power, a silent, unexercised veto he was desperate to extinguish. And to my housekeeper of 30 years, Maria Flores Finch continued, "I bequeath the sum of $250,000 with my deepest gratitude for her loyalty and kindness." Richard rolled his eyes. $250,000 to the help. It was just the sort of bleeding heart gesture Claire would make. Tiffany nudged him, whispering, "That's sweet." Richard just grunted. Finch turned a page. The air in the room seemed to still. This was it. "Regarding my primary assets." Finch read, his voice taking on a new weight, including the property at 2800 Pacific Avenue, the associated art and antique collection, my portfolio of securities managed by Goldman Sachs, and all personal effects not otherwise specified. Richard leaned forward, the smirk returning to his face. Tiffany straightened up, her eyes gleaming. And most significantly, Finch paused, letting the words hang in the air. "My 51% majority stake in Sterling Enterprises." Richard felt a surge of triumph. It was all coming to him. Complete control. The final shackle of his marriage, broken at last. He reached over and squeezed Tiffany's hand, holding it up slightly in a gesture of shared victory. He caught Judge Pendleton's eye and gave him a slow, deliberate wink. It was then that he started to laugh. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a low, confident chuckle that rumbled in his chest. A laugh that said, "I won. I always win." Finch's eyes, cold as a winter sea, met his. He held the gaze for a moment before looking back down at the will. "I bequeath in their entirety," he read, his voice clear and sharp as breaking glass, "to my brother, Mr. Leo Foster." The laughter died in Richard's throat, choked off as if by an invisible hand. The silence that crashed down in its place was absolute. It was heavier than the mahogany, more suffocating than the stale air. Richard stared, his mind refusing to process the words. My brother Claire didn't have a brother. She was an only child. This was a joke. A sick, twisted joke. What the word came out, as a strangled whisper. "What did you say?" Tiffany's hand went limp in his. Her face, moments before alight with greedy anticipation, was now a canvas of stunned confusion. Finch did not look up. He simply repeated the line, each word a hammer blow against Richard's world. "I bequeath in their entirety to my brother, Mr. Leo Foster." For a long moment, Richard Sterling did not move. He was frozen, the triumphant smirk still etched on his face, a grotesque mask of an emotion that had vanished. The name echoed in the silent courtroom, Leo Foster. It was a name he had never heard a person who, as far as he knew, did not exist. "That's impossible," Richard finally managed his voice, dangerously low. "Claire was an only child. This is a fabrication." "Finch, what game are you playing?" "Alistair." Finch calmly turned another page of the will, ignoring Richard's outburst. "The will is perfectly legal and validated, Mr. Sterling. Perhaps if you had paid more attention to your wife and less to your acquisitions, you might have been aware of her family history." The lawyer's words were professional, yet they carried the sharp, personal sting of a rapier. "Objection." Richard's own lawyer, a young, slick attorney named Peterson, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is an outrage. My client has been married to the deceased for 25 years. The notion of a secret brother is preposterous. We contest the validity of this document." Judge Pendleton looked down from his bench, his expression impassive. "On what grounds, Mr. Peterson?" "Mr. Finch has already attested that Mrs. Sterling was of sound mind. Do you have evidence to the contrary?" "Well, no, not at this moment, but—" "Then sit down," the judge commanded. "Mr. Finch, please continue. The court is most interested to hear the rest of Mrs. Sterling's testament." Richard felt a hot surge of rage and panic. He looked at Tiffany. The brilliant sparkle in her eyes had been replaced by a dawning horror. Her grip on his hand was now desperate, her nails digging into his palm. Her future was evaporating before her very eyes, and she was looking to him to fix it. Finch cleared his throat and continued reading from the will, his voice now narrating Claire's own words. "To my husband, Richard Sterling," he read, and Richard's head snapped up. "I leave the following. First, I leave you the memory of the woman I was when we met a woman who believed in your ambition and saw a light in you that you yourself extinguished. I leave you the knowledge that for 25 years you had the loyalty of a partner you never deserved and never truly valued." The words were a direct assault. The courtroom was silent, every clerk and bailiff listening intently. This was no longer a simple reading of a will. It was a public judgment. "Second," Finch continued, Claire's voice echoing through him, "I leave you the contents of the small lacquered box on my vanity. You always wondered what was inside. It contains every receipt from every piece of jewelry, every hotel room, every dinner you ever bought for your mistresses, starting with your secretary Jennifer in 1998. I thought it fitting that you should have a tangible record of the cost of your infidelity." A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. Tiffany went rigid, her face paling beneath its expensive tan. She slowly pulled her hand from Richard's. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered that box, a simple, elegant thing he'd once tried to open, only to find it locked. He had assumed it held old love letters or some other sentimental foolishness. The meticulous, damning evidence she had been collecting. It was terrifying. But Finch wasn't finished. "Third and finally, I leave you the sum of $1 to be paid from the petty cash account of Sterling Enterprises, the company you managed, but will now never own. I also absolve you of the $2.7 million I loaned you in 2009 to cover your disastrous private losses in the commodities market, a loan you took from our joint accounts and never repaid. Consider the forgiveness of that debt my final parting gift. It is, after all, the only thing you ever truly wanted from me, my money. The courtroom was spinning. The $2.7 million. No one was supposed to know about that. It was a secret humiliation, a moment of profound failure he had buried deep. Claire had known. She had known and said nothing, letting him believe he had gotten away with it. "This is a lie," Richard roared, surging to his feet. "She's insane. She was a sick, vindictive woman. This will is proof of her madness." "Mr. Sterling, sit down." Judge Pendleton's voice boomed, the gavel cracking like a gunshot. Two bailiffs moved to stand behind Richard's chair. Finch held up a hand, a gesture of calm in the storm. "Your Honor, if I may." Mrs. Sterling anticipated this reaction. The next section of her will provide the necessary context. He adjusted his glasses and read on. "To clarify the matter of my brother Leo Foster. He was born Leo Lowell on May 12, 1980. I was 17. Our parents, fearing scandal and the damage to our family's reputation, forced me to give him up for a closed adoption. They told me he would have a better life, and I was too young and too scared to fight them. They then erased every trace of his existence, and I was sworn to a lifetime of silence. It was the great sorrow of my life, a secret I kept even from my husband, because I knew he would only ever see my lost child as a vulnerability to be exploited." The revelation was stunning. It recast Claire not as a passive victim, but as a woman who had been carrying a profound, secret grief for her entire adult life. "For the past 10 years, Finch read his voice, softening slightly, "I have used a private investigator to find my son, our son. I found him 3 years ago. His name is Leo Foster. He is a high school history teacher in Oak Haven, Oregon. He is married, has a daughter, and from everything I have learned, he is a good and decent man. A man my father would have been proud to call his son." Richard sank back into his chair, stunned into silence. A son. She had a son. A brother. A teacher in some backwater town. This was the man who was inheriting his empire. "I have never contacted him." Claire's words continued to pour from Finch's mouth. "I feared that my world, tainted by Richard's greed and my own weakness in confronting it, would only bring him pain. I chose instead to watch him from a distance, to see the life he had built, a life of meaning and integrity, not of wealth and excess. And in my final days, I made a decision. The Sterling fortune, built on the foundation of my Lowell family's legacy, will not be a monument to Richard's avarice. It will be a tool for a man who understands the value of things that cannot be bought." Finch turned the final page. "As for my 51% controlling stake in Sterling Enterprises, it is bequeathed to Leo Foster with a single binding condition. This condition, detailed in a separate codicil to be presented to Mr. Foster, is designed to protect the company and its employees from the rot that has set in under Richard's leadership. Full details will be made clear to Mr. Foster upon his acceptance of this inheritance." Finch looked up first at Richard, then at the judge. "That concludes the main bequests of the will, Your Honor." Richard was no longer just angry. He was terrified. A condition, a codicil. This wasn't just disinheritance. This was a strategic, brilliantly executed demolition. Claire hadn't just written a will. She had laid a minefield. and he had just danced right into the middle of it. He looked at Tiffany. She was staring at him, her beautiful face a mixture of pity and contempt. In her eyes, he was no longer a powerful millionaire. He was just a man who had been outmaneuvered by his dead wife. The power, the allure, the entire foundation of their relationship had been vaporized in the space of 10 minutes. Without a word, she stood up, smoothed her crimson dress, and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking an elegant final rhythm on the marble floor. She didn't look back. Richard Sterling was for the first time in his life completely and utterly alone. 300 miles away in the quiet town of Oak Haven, Oregon, the bell signaling the end of third period shrieked through the halls of Northwood High. Leo Foster sighed, capping the whiteboard marker he'd been using to diagram the causes of the Peloponnesian War. The noise of 100 teenagers flooding the hallway washed over him. "All right, guys, remember to read Chapter 7 for Friday. There will be a pop quiz," he called out over the din, though he knew only a handful of them were listening. Leo Foster was a man who fit his surroundings. At 45, he had the gentle, slightly rumpled look of a man who spent more time thinking about historical battles than his own wardrobe. His hair had started to grey at the temples, and his glasses were perpetually sliding down his nose. He loved his job. He loved making history come alive for kids who thought anything before the invention of the iPhone was ancient. He loved his life. It was a simple life. He and his wife Sarah, a nurse at the local clinic, lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house they were still paying off. Their world revolved around their 12-year-old daughter Maya and her soccer schedules. Their biggest financial debate that month had been whether they could afford to replace their aging dishwasher, or if they should try to get one more year out of it. As his students filed out, Leo erased the board, his mind already on the lesson plan for tomorrow. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a text from Sarah about who was picking Maya up from practice. The screen showed an unknown number with a San Francisco area code. He almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but on a whim, he answered. "Hello. Am I speaking with Mr. Leo Foster?" The voice on the other end was formal, precise, and carried an air of old-world authority. "This is he," Leo said, stacking a pile of graded essays. "Mr. Foster, my name is Alistair Finch. I am an attorney with the firm Finch Lowell and Dean in San Francisco. I am calling you in my capacity as the executor of the estate of the late Claire Lowell Sterling." Leo frowned. The name meant nothing to him. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. I don't know anyone by that name. I assure you, Mr. Foster." "I have the right person," the lawyer said patiently. "Claire Sterling was your biological sister." Leo stopped what he was doing. He slowly sat down in the worn chair behind his desk. The sounds of the hallway faded away. What? That's not possible. I was adopted. My records are sealed. I don't have any siblings. Your birth name was Leo Lowell." Mr. Finch continued, his tone unwavering. "You were born in San Francisco to a young woman named Claire Lowell. She was your sister. I was her attorney, and I am now the executor of her will. It was her final wish that you be found." Leo's mind reeled. He had always known he was adopted. His parents, the Fosters, had been open with him from the beginning. They were wonderful, loving people who had given him a happy childhood. He'd had a mild curiosity about his birth parents, but he'd never felt a burning need to search for them. His life was here. A sister he never knew he had. And she was dead. I don't understand, Leo stammered. Why are you calling me Mrs. Sterling? Passed away last week after a long illness, Finch explained gently. Her will was read in probate court this morning. Mr. Foster, Claire has named you as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. Leo let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure disbelief. Her estate. What she left me, a box of old photos. Mr. Finch, is this some kind of prank? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Foster, the lawyer, said, his voice grave. Claire Sterling's estate includes a significant portfolio of assets. It includes a $20 million mansion in Pacific Heights, an art collection valued at roughly $40 million, and a stock portfolio worth approximately $100 million. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. This had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by grading too many papers on Athenian democracy. But that's not the most significant part, Finch went on. Claire also bequeathed to you her 51% controlling interest in a corporation called Sterling Enterprises. Sterling Enterprises. Leo repeated the name. It sounded vaguely familiar. He was sure he'd seen it in the business section of the news. A tech and manufacturing giant. Yes. Its current market capitalization fluctuates, but your stake is valued at a conservative estimate at around $900 million. The number was so vast, so utterly incomprehensible, that it didn't even register as money. It was an abstraction, a string of zeros. Mr. Foster. Are you still there? Yes. Leo croaked, his throat dry. Yes, I'm here. Why? Why me? She didn't know me. Oh, but she did, Finch said softly. Forgive me. This next part may be difficult. After she found you, Claire spent the last 3 years of her life learning everything she could about you. She hired a discreet investigator. She has photographs of you coaching Maya's soccer team. She has a copy of the article from the local paper when you won Teacher of the Year. She read the essays you published in a small historical journal. She knew you, Leo, and she was so incredibly proud of you. Tears welled in Leo's eyes. A sister who had watched him from afar. A hole in his heart he never knew existed. Suddenly ached with a profound sense of loss for a person he had never met. Her husband. Leo began his mind grasping for details. What about him Mrs. Sterling's will made? Other provisions for Mr. Richard Sterling Finch, said, a hint of steel returning to his voice. That is a matter you and I should discuss in person. Mr. Foster. I know this is a tremendous shock, but I must ask you to come to San Francisco as soon as possible. There are complications and decisions that only you can make. Leo looked around his classroom. The faded posters of ancient Rome, the dusty bookshelves, the faint smell of chalk dust. His whole world, so solid and real just minutes ago, now felt like a fragile dream. He had a sister. Her name was Claire, and she had just handed him an empire. He didn't know it yet, but she had also handed him a war. A war against a man he had never met. A man who had just lost everything and would stop at nothing to get it back. 2 days later, Leo Foster walked into the plushest office he had ever seen. The law firm of Finch Lowell and Dean occupied the top floor of a skyscraper in San Francisco's financial district. The windows offered a panoramic view of the bay, a vista that probably cost more per month than Leo's house was worth. Alistair Finch greeted him with a firm handshake. In person, The lawyer was exactly as his voice had suggested. Impeccably dressed, courteous, and with an intensity in his gaze that was both unnerving and reassuring. He looked at Leo not as an interloper, but as the rightful heir to a long-held legacy. "Mr. Foster, thank you for coming so promptly," Finch said, gesturing to a large leather chair. "Can I offer you some coffee?" Water would be great." "Thank you," Leo said, his voice still feeling foreign in these surroundings. He had told Sarah a partial truth that a distant relative had passed away, and he was needed in San Francisco to sort out a complex legal matter. He couldn't bring himself to say the number 900 million out loud. It felt like speaking a magic spell that could shatter his reality. Once they were settled, Finch leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished surface of his desk. "Leo, I won't mince words. Claire has left you a great fortune, but she has also left you a great burden. This is not a simple inheritance. It is a rescue mission. A rescue mission. For Sterling Enterprises," Finch confirmed, "and for her own legacy. Let me begin by telling you about Richard Sterling." For the next hour, Finch painted a detailed, damning portrait of the man who had been married to Leo's sister. He spoke of Richard's ruthlessness in business, his serial infidelity, and his slow, systematic isolation of Claire from her friends and family. But he didn't stop there. Claire was not just a silent victim, Finch explained. She was intelligent. For years, she suspected Richard was using the company as his personal piggy bank. About 18 months ago, with her health failing, she empowered me to launch a quiet internal forensic audit using a trusted firm that operated under the guise of a routine financial review. Finch slid a thick, bound report across the desk. "This is what we found. Richard Sterling has been cooking the books for at least a decade. He created shell corporations to award fraudulent contracts, siphoning millions into offshore accounts. He used company funds to finance his lavish lifestyle, with his mistresses writing them off as client entertainment and marketing expenses. He leveraged company assets for high-risk personal investments, exposing Sterling Enterprises to catastrophic debt." Leo stared at the report, his stomach churning. This wasn't just a bad husband. This was a criminal. "The company is a house of cards," Leo Finch said grimly. "It looks solid from the outside, but Richard has hollowed it out. The employees, thousands of them, are good people. They have no idea that their pensions and their jobs are balanced on a knife's edge. Can't we just go to the authorities?" The SEC, Leo asked, feeling hopelessly out of his depth. "We can, and we will." But Claire wanted more than just to see him punished. She wanted to save what her father built. "That is where you come in, and that is the substance of the codicil mentioned in the will." Finch opened another leather folio, this one sealed with a wax stamp bearing the Lowell family crest. He broke the seal. "This is Claire's condition for your inheritance of the 51% stake in the company," he said. "It is, in her own words, a test of character designed to be everything Richard Sterling is not." He began to read. The condition was multifaceted, a strategic masterpiece of posthumous control. First, Leo could not simply take ownership and sell the shares. He was bound to hold the 51% stake for a minimum of 10 years. He was being made a steward, not a lottery winner. Second, he was required to assume the position of chairman of the board of Sterling Enterprises. He, a history teacher, was to lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Third, and most crucially, he had 90 days to complete 3 tasks. Task 1, Finch read from the document. "You must use the findings of the forensic audit to initiate a full, transparent, internal restructuring of the company. You must root out every one of Richard's cronies, terminate every fraudulent contract, and cooperate fully with federal investigators to bring him and his accomplices to justice. Leo swallowed hard. This was already overwhelming. Task 2. Finch continued. You must establish the Claire Lowell Foundation, a charitable trust funded by 20% of the company's annual profits. Its mission will be to support education, particularly for underprivileged students, and to provide sanctuary for victims of domestic emotional abuse. Claire specified that you, Leo, must serve as its head, ensuring the money is used as she intended. This resonated with Leo. It was something he could understand, a mission that aligned with his own values. It was a piece of his sister's heart made manifest. And task 3, Finch said, his eyes meeting Leo's. You must go to the Pacific Heights mansion. In the library, behind a false panel in the fireplace, is a safe. Inside that safe is my personal journal, which I have kept since I was a girl. You must read it. All of it. You must understand my life, the choices I made, and the reasons I fell silent for so long. Only by understanding my past can you secure the company's future. Finch closed the folio. If you fail to complete these 3 tasks within 90 days, or if you refuse to accept the chairmanship, the 51% stake in Sterling Enterprises will be immediately liquidated and the proceeds donated in their entirety to a list of charities. You would still inherit the liquid assets, the cash, the art, the property, a fortune by any measure, but the company and Claire's legacy would be lost. Leo felt as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. Claire had not just given him a gift. She had given him a test, a poisoned chalice. He could take a life-changing amount of money and walk away, or he could step into the fire and try to honor the last wish of a sister he never knew. It's an impossible choice, Leo whispered. She knew it would be, Finch said. She was testing whether you were the man she believed you to be. Richard Sterling would have taken the money and run without a second thought. She is betting everything, her entire life's work, that you will not. Suddenly the door to the office burst open. Richard Sterling, his face a mask of incandescent fury, stormed into the room. He was no longer the smug, composed tycoon from the courtroom. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were wild with desperation. "Finch, you son of a bitch," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at the lawyer. "You think you can get away with this? Stealing my company?" His eyes then landed on Leo. They swept over him, taking in the simple, off-the-rack jacket and the stunned expression. A look of utter contempt crossed Richard's face. "And you," he spat, his voice dripping with venom, "you're the long-lost brother, the history teacher. You look like you cut your own hair. You think you can run my company? You wouldn't know a balance sheet from a roll of toilet paper. This is a joke." Leo, shocked, could only stare back. "This isn't over." Richard snarled, jabbing his finger towards them both. "I built that company. It's mine. I will fight you in court. I will drag this out for years until you are buried in legal fees. And you," he said, his glare locking onto Leo. "I will destroy you. I will dig up every mistake you've ever made, every skeleton in your closet. By the time I'm done, your name will be mud in that pathetic little town of yours. You'll wish you'd never heard the name Claire Sterling." With that, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a painting on the wall rattled. The silence he left behind was heavy and menacing. Alistair Finch sighed, adjusting his tie. "Well," he said dryly, "now you have a clearer picture of the opposition." Leo looked from the door where Richard had vanished to the codicil on the desk. The choice was no longer an abstract one. It had a face, a sneering, hateful face that had tormented his sister for years. In that moment, something inside Leo shifted. This was no longer just about honoring a stranger's last wish. It was about justice. "Mr. Finch." Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Where do we start?" The next 60 days were a baptism by fire. Leo moved into a hotel in San Francisco, flying home on weekends to see Sarah and Maya, trying to explain the surreal new reality of his life without revealing its sheer, terrifying scale. He told them he was consulting on a historical project for a large corporation, a story that felt flimsier each time he told it. His days were spent in the glass and steel fortress of Sterling Enterprises. Guided by Alistair Finch and the forensic accountants, Leo began the systematic dismantling of Richard's corrupt empire. It was a daunting task. Richard's network was like a cancer, with tendrils reaching into nearly every department. The first challenge was the board of directors. They were Richard's men, hand-picked for their loyalty and their willingness to look the other way. Leo, as the new majority shareholder, called an emergency meeting. He walked into the boardroom, a long, intimidating chamber dominated by a colossal mahogany table. 10 pairs of eyes, all belonging to powerful, hostile men in expensive suits, fixed on him. They looked at him as if he were a janitor who had wandered into the wrong room. Leo, armed with Finch's detailed notes and his own quiet resolve, did not flinch. He didn't try to pretend he was a corporate titan. He was a teacher. So he taught. "Good morning, gentlemen," he began, his voice calm. "My name is Leo Foster, for those of you who don't know my story. Let me be brief. I am Claire Sterling's brother. And as of 2 months ago, I am the new chairman of this board." He proceeded to lay out the findings of the audit, not with anger, but with the cold, hard facts of a historian presenting evidence. He detailed the shell corporations, the fraudulent invoices, the offshore accounts. He named names. 3 of the men at the table were directly implicated. Under the bylaws of this corporation, and with the authority vested in me as the majority shareholder, Leo concluded, "I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the present board. Furthermore, I am terminating the employment of Mr. Davies, Mr. Chen, and Mr. Rodriguez, effective immediately pending federal investigation." The room erupted. Shouts of outrage, threats of lawsuits. But Leo and Finch were prepared. They had security waiting. The 3 implicated men were escorted from the building, clutching their briefcases, their faces pale with shock and fury. To the remaining board members, Leo made a simple proposition. "You can work with me to save this company and restore its integrity, or you can resign. There is no third option." Faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of being complicit, most chose to cooperate. The tide was beginning to turn. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was not idle. He waged a war in the press, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive, mentally unstable wife and a backwoods opportunist. He filed a flurry of lawsuits challenging the will's validity, questioning Claire's soundness of mind, and accusing Finch of undue influence. He hired private investigators to dig into Leo's life, just as he had threatened. One evening, Leo got a frantic call from Sarah. "Leo, what is going on?" she cried. "There are reporters outside our house. A man from some tabloid called the school, asking my principal if she knew you had a gambling problem. Your ex-girlfriend from college is on some gossip website claiming you were emotionally manipulative." "What is happening?" Leo's heart sank. This was Richard's work. The filth he had promised to sling was now fouling the clean, simple life he had built. He felt a wave of guilt and fear. He had brought this darkness upon his family. "Sarah, I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise I will explain everything. Just don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way." He flew home that night. He sat Sarah down at their kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix, and he told her everything. The secret sister, the will, the $900 million, the corruption, Richard's threats. She listened in stunned silence, her face a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, fear, anger, and then a surprising, fierce pride. "That man," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "That Richard, he is trying to bully you into quitting. He thinks you're weak because you're a good person. He's wrong." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You have to finish this, Leo. For your sister. You can't let him win." Her strength became his. With his family now fully behind him, Leo returned to San Francisco with a renewed sense of purpose. He established the Claire Lowell Foundation, pouring his heart into crafting its charter. He met with educators and counselors, people from his world, to build a board that understood the mission. For the first time, he felt a flicker of what Claire must have intended, the fusion of her wealth with his values. With 60 of the 90 days gone, only one task remained, the most personal one. He had to go to the mansion. He had to read his sister's journal. He had been avoiding it. The mansion was the heart of the story, the place where Claire had lived and suffered. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground, but he knew he couldn't move forward until he had looked back. With Alistair Finch by his side, Leo used the keys he had been given to unlock the towering front doors of 2800 Pacific Avenue. The house was a palace, silent and vast. Sunlight streamed through 2-story windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The furniture was all covered in white sheets, making the grand rooms look like a landscape of gentle, sleeping ghosts. They found the library. It was a magnificent room, lined floor to ceiling with books. It smelled of leather and old paper. Leo ran his hand along the spines, seeing the titles Claire had willed to the public library. He felt a connection to her, a shared love of stories. Finch showed him the fireplace. "Claire told me about this a month before she passed. She said only one other person knew the combination her." Leo knelt. He found the loose stone Finch described and pulled it away. Behind it was a small, modern keypad. Finch handed him a slip of paper. "The code is the day you were born, May 12th, 1980. Leo's fingers trembled as he typed in the numbers, 05128. There was a soft click, and a section of the ornate fireplace surround swung inward, revealing a dark metal safe door. On the front of the safe was a combination dial. "This is the part she didn't write down," Finch said. "She told me the combination herself. She said it was the one thing Richard could never take from her." Finch recited the numbers slowly, and Leo turned the dial. Left, right, left. A heavy thunk echoed in the silent room. Leo pulled the handle, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, there was only one object, a simple leather-bound journal worn at the edges, held shut by a faded ribbon. Leo reached in and took it. It felt warm, almost alive in his hands. This was it, the final key. The voice of the sister he had never met. He sat down in a sheet-covered armchair, the dust puffing up around him, and untied the ribbon. He opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, youthful, and full of hope. September 4th, 1979. It began. I met a boy today. His name is Richard Sterling. He is so ambitious and clever. I think I am in love. Leo took a deep breath and began to read his sister's life. For 2 days, Leo did not leave the mansion. He had food sent in, and he slept on a sheet-covered sofa in the library, a ghost in his own sister's house. He read. He absorbed Claire's life page by page, year by year. The early entries were filled with the breathless, innocent romance of a 17-year-old girl. She wrote of Richard's charm, his fierce ambition, how he made her feel seen in a way her staid, proper family never had. She wrote of their secret meetings, their dreams of building a future together. Then came the entry that changed everything. March 10th, 1980. I am pregnant, I told Richard. He was not happy. He said it would ruin us. My parents must never know. He said we have to take care of it. I cried for hours. This is not a problem to be solved. This is our baby. Leo's hands tightened on the journal. He read on his heart, aching as Claire described the agony of the next few months. Richard's coldness, the crushing pressure from her parents when they inevitably found out. The word scandal was used like a weapon against her. They arranged the adoption, presenting it as the only sensible option. May 13th, 1980. They took him from me today. The nurse let me hold him for just a moment. He has my eyes. I named him Leo for my grandfather, the only one in the family who ever had a lion's heart. They made me sign the papers. My mother said we will never speak of this again. I have never felt so empty. A part of me is gone forever. Leo had to stop reading. Tears streamed down his face for the mother he never knew, for the pain she had endured for the stolen moments of their lives. He continued reading through the years. The journal detailed her marriage to Richard, a union built on the cracked foundation of that initial betrayal. She described her hope that they could recapture their early love, a hope that slowly, painfully withered. The entries became shorter, more observational. She wrote of Richard's successes, the growth of the company, but there was a detachment, as if she were chronicling a stranger's life. Then came the first mention of infidelity. June 22nd, 1928. I found a receipt in Richard's coat pocket for a necklace I never received, from a jeweler I adore. Later I saw his secretary Jennifer wearing it. He didn't even try to be clever. It felt not like a betrayal, but like a dismissal, as if I am no longer relevant enough to even lie to. From that point on, the tone of the journal shifted. The sadness was still there, but it was now underpinned by a new, cold clarity. Claire began to document everything. The late nights, the flimsy excuses, the extravagant gifts for other women. She became an archivist of her own heartbreak. And then she started digging deeper. November 5th, 2012. Richard thinks I spend my days planning charity luncheons. Today, I spent 6 hours in a public library computer terminal learning how to trace shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. He is moving money out of the company. My father's company. He is not just a bad husband. He is a thief. Leo was in awe of her. This quiet gentlewoman he had imagined was a warrior in secret. While presenting a face of serene high society compliance, she was teaching herself forensic accounting, gathering evidence, and planning her countermove. She wrote about finding him. August 16th, 2022. I have his address, Oak Haven, Oregon. The investigator brought me photos. He is a teacher. He has a wife, a daughter. They look so happy. His name is Leo Foster. Foster. It's a good name. A name that means care and nurturing. They were good parents. I am so grateful to them. Seeing him so full of life and purpose is the first time I have felt true joy in 30 years. The final entries were written in a shaky, frail hand. She knew she was dying. February 20th, 2025. I met with Alistair today. The will is finalized. The trap is set. Richard believes my illness has made me weak. In truth, it has made me focused. It has burned away all the fear and indecision. All that is left is the need to protect what is good and to correct what is wrong. And then the last entry written just 2 days before she died. It wasn't addressed to the journal anymore. It was addressed to him. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means my plan has worked. It means you are the man I prayed you would be. I am so sorry for the life I could not give you. I am sorry for the silence. My greatest regret is that I was too cowardly to reach out to know my own son. I was afraid of staining your good life with the darkness of mine. But now I am giving you a chance to do what I could not, to fight back. Richard's greed is a sickness. Don't let it consume my father's legacy. Use this wealth, this power, to build things, not to buy them. Build futures for students. Build safe havens for women who have lost their voices. Build a life for your family, free from the burdens that shackled me. He will fight you. He will be cruel and vicious because you represent everything he despises: integrity, decency, a wealth that has nothing to do with money. Do not let his darkness dim your light. I have one last gift for you. The final piece of the puzzle. Behind the shelves of 19th century poetry, there is another panel. The code is Richard's birthday. He is a narcissist. He would never imagine I would use it for anything but him. Inside, you will find a hard drive. It contains every piece of evidence I ever gathered, duplicates of the receipts, recordings of incriminating phone calls Richard foolishly made on the house line, copies of bank statements from his hidden accounts. It is his ruin in a neat little package. This is my justice. Make it yours. Live well, my son, my brother, my lion heart. Your loving sister, Claire. Leo closed the journal, his body trembling with a storm of emotions, grief, rage, and a profound, empowering love for the woman who had orchestrated this entire saga from beyond the grave. He stood up and walked to the wall of poetry books. He found the section. Behind a row of Wordsworth, he felt a small indentation. He pressed it. A panel clicked open. And there, just as she had said, was a small black hard drive. He looked at the hard drive, then at the journal in his other hand. He now had the sword and the shield. Claire hadn't just left him a fortune or a company. She had left him a purpose. He picked up his phone and dialed Alistair Finch. "Alistair," he said, his voice hard as steel. "It's done. I've read it. And I have something for you. Something Claire called the final piece of the puzzle. It's time to end this." Claire's final gift. The small black hard drive was the key that unlocked Richard's ruin. Once in the hands of the FBI, the data it held was irrefutable. There was no dramatic, drawn-out trial. Richard Sterling's downfall was swift and surgical. He was arrested not in a boardroom, but on the manicured green of his exclusive country club, a public humiliation that evaporated the last vestiges of his power. Faced with an avalanche of his own digital and recorded words, he accepted a plea deal to avoid a public spectacle that would reveal the full sordid extent of his crimes. 6 months later, the world had been reshaped by Claire's will. Sterling Enterprises, purged of its corrupt leadership, was thriving under a new charter of transparency and innovation. The employees, once fearful for their jobs, now worked for a company they were proud of. The grand mansion on Pacific Avenue, once a monument to lonely opulence, had been reborn. As Claire House, it was now a vibrant sanctuary, offering safety and support to women and children fleeing abuse. Its halls, once silent, were filled with hope. Leo Foster stood in his modest chairman's office, a room he rarely used, preferring his life and his family in Oakhaven. He looked out at the panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay, a world away from his high school classroom. On his desk sat a single framed photograph, a picture of Claire he'd found in her journal, her eyes bright with a hope he now understood. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, showing their daughter Maya beaming with pride as she held a science fair trophy. Leo smiled the warmth of that simple image, a powerful anchor to his true north. He had stepped into a world of unimaginable wealth and power, but he had not lost himself. Richard Sterling was in a federal prison. Tiffany Monroe had faded into obscurity. But Claire's legacy was more alive than ever. Leo had accepted his sister's fortune, but he knew her greatest bequest was not the money. It was a mission. He had honored her fight, protected her legacy, and in doing so discovered the lion heart she always believed he possessed. He had proven that true wealth is not what you own, but the good you build with it. The story of Claire Sterling is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true justice can find its way even from beyond the grave. It's a testament to the fact that integrity is not a liability, but the ultimate asset. Richard Sterling believed his wealth made him invincible, but he forgot that character is a currency that can't be embezzled. In the end, it wasn't his money that was judged, but his soul, and it was found wanting. What did you think of Claire's incredible plan? Was Richard's downfall satisfying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of poetic justice and hidden strength moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good story of triumph, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support helps us bring these incredible stories to light. Thank you for listening.